Greetings and salutations. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of A Conversation With here on the SevereMMA YouTube page. I am Spencer Kite, your friendly neighborhood Spencer man, and I am joined by Brad Wharton, commenter, broadcaster for Cage Warriors. And as I was saying, as we were getting started, international man of mystery, because in doing my research, and I pride myself on my research, you're a hard man to learn things about, Brad Wharton. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, sir. I'm enjoying a lovely rainy January afternoon here in England. So if you do hear any what sounds like a tsunami, that's just the rain hitting my window. I'll try and turn the gain down on the old mic if it does, but it is a rainy day here. But I love the rain, so
that's fine. I live on the west coast of Canada. As I said with Pip, it is the closest you can get, I think, to living similar to living in England, where it's kind of overcast and rainy lots of time, but like you, I prefer that to the snow that I grew up with. I don't have to shovel rain, so I will take rain any day of the week.
That's a good point. It's the best of weathers, I think. Doesn't burn you like the sun.
Doesn't burn you like the sun. Yes, I am very fair-skinned. Me and the sun aren't friends. Yeah. So we will start as we always do, and that is, when did you fall in love with combat sports?
I have like very early memories of combat sports sort of being talked about in the house and around the house and stuff, and I guess that probably goes back to Frank Bruno and Mike Tyson. Obviously that was huge in British boxing at the time, and Frank Bruno, such a big character, and those fights with Tyson were like genuine like cultural moments. You couldn't avoid that, and even me as a young kid, when that first fight happened, I was still aware of it. I drawn pictures of Mike Tyson and Frank Bruno at play school when I was like 3-4 years old or something stupid like that, which my mum still has somewhere, bless her. So yeah, I guess there was that. And then I remember bizarrely watching sumo wrestling at a very young age. It used to be on TV over here quite regularly when I was maybe about 6 or 7 years old. And I had this crappy black and white TV in my bedroom. It's like my granddad's old TV from his caravan that he'd sort of gifted us. And it was like there was a dial on it. I'm aging myself here really badly, but there was a dial to change channels, and I just remember being able to get channel 4 and watch the sumo wrestling in my bedroom, and I thought that was very cool. And then obviously, as a kid growing up in the 80s, wrestling was a huge thing, and kind of enjoying the sort of larger than life character aspect of it. And then finding the UFC in the mid 90s. I'd done a bit of karate and stuff, and sort of seen a bit of kickboxing and things like that. But seeing Ken Shamrock kind of walk out in the WWF, and then trying desperately to find out what this ultimate fighting thing was, because obviously there was no internet really back then, or certainly none that I could access anyway. But I moved to Holland as a teenager, and combat sports is huge over there because it's like the second biggest country in the world for kickboxing. So my local video store had loads of kickboxing tapes, Dutch MMA tapes, and when I started renting them, the dude realized like, oh, this guy's into his combat sports, and under the counter he had all these dodgy UFCs, like pirate copies of UFCs,
right.
And he would just chuck me a couple of UFCs every time. I'd go in there on the weekend, rent a few movies, and it's weird because in Holland, hardcore pornography is legal. So they had the hardcore pornography on the shelf, and the UFC.
But the dodgy UFC.
Yeah, I've got the UFC in the back room
tapes,
for you. Yeah.
Right.
Just kind of the opposite of every other video store.
Just about everywhere else you could possibly go in. So you're not dating yourself with the dials. I am 44. I understand the dials. Lived that life myself. It sounds like we had very similar sort of trajectories of did a bit of this, liked the movies, liked pro wrestling. I was going through some stuff and doing my research yesterday, and you sent out a lovely glad to see Spencer on SevereMMA. Love what he's doing. It's the best hookup since the Mega Powers, and that truly, when it came out and then again seeing it yesterday, just touched deep within like the 12-13-year-old of me that loved that storyline. And then of course the Mega Powers exploding. We'll get to move to Holland as a teen, because I'm sure there's plenty to get into there. One thing that I feel like now this is the perfect time for me to ask. I am Canadian. You're British. Lennox Lewis. He was sort of toggled between the two of us. He represented us in the Olympics and won a medal, and then was like, nah, I'm British. I'm living back home. I'm going back there. Where does he fall? Where does he fit? You mentioned Tyson and Bruno, obviously, and Frank Bruno being a big character. What was and is, I guess, the perception and sort of standing of a guy like Lennox Lewis in England?
I think because we're such a small country, we love a winner, and we will jump on a winner really, really quickly, right? You know,
Same
if
here.
when
It's the
Lennox
same here.
loses, when Lennox Lewis starts losing fights, all of a
He's
sudden
Canadian.
he's Canadian. You know, and look, I guess, you know, from Lennox's point of view, in a way, it's probably was good for business. You know, boxing is a huge market in England,
Absolutely.
and British boxing has produced some of the biggest stars in the world. You know, I'm sure there was probably some sort of promotional leaning on him to be like, you know, you're the British boxing guy now, kind of thing, and to sort of play that up. I was kind of like all in on MMA by the time Lennox was sort of at his peak. So I've kind of drifted in and out of boxing. But I mean, as a talent, you can't really fault the guy. Just an absolutely phenomenal athlete and a phenomenal performer, hugely charismatic. You know, I would kind of rate myself as more of a casual boxing fan these days, in that, you know, I tune in for the big fights, and the big fights are always, you know, the heavyweight title fights, and they always have been, really. And for me, Lewis personifies, you know, the world heavyweight champion figure. Like,
Right.
he's big, he's technical, he's powerful, and he's got charisma for days. He's the guy that boxing could hang its hat on at that time. You know, just like the Furies and the Joshuas of today, and the Klitschko's and Tysons and Holyfields of the past.
I would agree very much. And we, it seems, the Commonwealth ties here. We are the same way in Canada. Love a winner. Toronto Raptors making a run to the title. Everybody loves the Raptors. Everybody has always loved the Raptors. This season, when it's not going well, I never really was a Raptors fan. Kind of like some other teams and local and whoever's right across the border. So it all makes sense.
Yeah, we had a fighter called Corey McKenna, who's obviously in the UFC now. She was with us at Cage Warriors for a while, and she's half Welsh, half English. So whenever she was on the Wales card, it was always Wales Corey McKenna, and whenever she's fighting in London, it's she's from Colchester down the road.
Perfect. Who were, for you? You mentioned sort of getting into early days of UFC, getting the under the counter tapes. Who were some of the early favorites? You mentioned Shamrock, obviously a guy that I think for anybody our age that got into seeing those early UFCs, Hoist was the winner and there was something mysterious about him, but Shamrock was always the guy that jumped off the page to me. And then, you know, you see him in WWE and you're like, that's my guy. Who else was in there for you as early favorites?
I mean, yeah, Ken, obviously, as you mentioned. My first UFC that I watched was UFC 3. And the video for that was Ken Shamrock and Hoist Gracie facing off, which obviously they didn't actually do in that event because Ken pulled out. So yeah, Ken was the guy who was like, he looked the part, and at the time he was, you know, an excellent fighter as well. So I think he's the first guy that I naturally gravitated to. But the guy that I found that really, really made me fall in love with it was Igor Vovchanchyn. My guy at the video shop had all the International Valley Tudo, I think they were called. There was one called Night of the Diamond. It's difficult to talk about them because they were released on certain names on video in Europe and different names in America, and the actual names of the tournament was something quite different. But yeah, I watched a lot of early Igor Vovchanchyn stuff, the early bare knuckle tournaments that he was in. And like, for me, I mean, at the time he was ranked #1 heavyweight in the world, sort of early noughties, around the turn of the century. I was just amazed to see a guy who, you know, let's be honest, was probably a light heavyweight, possibly even a middleweight if he, you know, if he existed today, he almost certainly would be fighting at middleweight, because to be nowhere near tall enough even for light heavyweight. And, you know, he did drop down to light heavy at the end of his career. But for a guy who was like, you know, what, 5'9", 5'10", and at the time fighting these, you know, obviously I would go on to learn that a lot of the guys weren't necessarily elite level mixed martial artists, but, you know, he's in there with a guy like Paul Varlins, for example, who's 6'7",
monster of a man.
Yeah, you've got to remember at the time as well, you know, most people were still kind of the belief that martial arts was like the stuff that Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee did in movies. So you're thinking like, oh, this little dude who does all the, you know, all the flying kicks and this, that, and the other, this is how fighting works. And then to see a guy like Igor go out there and have real fights against
Right.
monsters and be
Monsters of
dropping
men.
these guys like planks, you know.
Right.
Seeing that was like, wow, how's this guy doing this? And for me as well, something that I'd obviously never seen before, you know, having, you know, watched stuff like sumo, boxing, kickboxing, a lot of the fights that Igor was doing in Russia and Ukraine, they were no time limits and infinite rounds, for example. So I had to tape one of Igor's tournaments where I think he fights 17 minutes in the first fight, and then he fights 40 odd minutes in the second fight, and then 15 minutes in the final fight. And the dude he fights in the final had fought like 5 minutes combined, and then he still won. And he won with headbutts from underneath guard. And I'm like, how can a human being do this? This is insane. I remember it might have been that tournament actually. I was sat watching that in my living room as a kid, and my mum came in, and she's not into combat sports or anything like that at all, not particularly fond of violence. And she came and sat down on the couch, and she hadn't moved by the time it finished. And she, every time he'd get like a reversal or something, she'd be like, "Oh my goodness, what's going on?" Like, and then all of a sudden, my mum's like this kind of closet Igor Vovchanchyn fan, and like asking me, "Is that little Russian guy on this tape you brought on this weekend?" It was nuts, man.
Nice.
Like, getting to see that with my mum was pretty cool.
Nice. And for you, what was the initial connection, or when did the initial connection for you of maybe MMA being a career, maybe commentary being a career, that sort of thing start taking root?
So I was in my 20s, I guess, maybe my mid to late 20s, and I was working for a video games company in Cambridge. I wasn't particularly enjoying it. It was a job. It was paying the bills and letting me, you know, do what I wanted to do socially, but it certainly wasn't something that I loved doing. And there was a website that I used to go on the forums for. It's called MMA Bay. It was an English website. And I used to write a lot on the forums. And I was like, at the time, obviously, it was difficult to get hold of stuff still, because in England, there was only UFC on TV. And even that was 24-hour tape delay. And you just got the 5-fight main card. There was no prelims or anything. So I'd kind of like scour the forums and find like the Japanese events to watch. Like, you could get, I mean, this was after Pride, but you could get Japanese events on eBay, usually, like some guy selling, knockoff DVDs on eBay. So I was kind of like an early days Kaposa, but with DVDs. I just had everything, and I watched so much of it. So when I go on the forums, I'd be posting quite a lot. People would be asking me questions. I'd be writing long answers. And the guy who ran the website was like, "Well, do you want to come and start writing for the website?" So I did, and it kind of just took off from there. I did like a weekly column, and then 2 weekly columns, and then we did, I guess what now would be called a podcast, but was called internet radio in the early days.
In the early days,
did that every weekend
before we had a better name for it. We just called it internet we took the two things that we knew that they were. This sounds like radio, and it's on the internet. Let's just call it internet radio.
Yeah, and it kind of went from there, and like it got to the point that website got sort of big enough to start paying me to go to events and stuff. So I could go and cover UFCs for them. I'd go and cover BAMA and some of the Cage Warriors events and other big shows. And then started getting a few paid gigs, and I'd been able to save quite a lot of money. Like, again, like, I was young, not having kids, lived in a shared house, so my rent wasn't too much. I had a lot of money in the bank, and I was like, you know what? I'm starting to make some money now. I'm going to give this a go. And I'm gonna see if I can make it as a quote unquote MMA journalist. Didn't work out in the end. Like, the website collapsed, as these things are wont to do, and I ended up having to get a proper job again. But I kind of like got to a point where I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do it for fun now. I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to get a proper job, and I'm just going to do the stuff I enjoy and not like have to grind. And because obviously, the nature of a website that was built on traffic and advertising like that is that, you could write a beautiful 2,000 word essay on why Igor Vovchanchyn was the premium 1996 Ukrainian cage fighter.
Right.
But that gets read by 10 people. And, your
You're
report
speaking to my heart here, Bradley.
Yeah. Your report on what Brock Lesnar's had for dinner that day gets viewed by 1 million people, and that's what you have to do. But it's part of the gig, isn't it? And I kind of like, I was at the stage where I was like, you know what, I'm kind of just going to jack it in and just take a step back from it all. And the phone rang, and it was Graham from Cage Warriors, and he was like, "Oh, we're trying to like build the brand a little bit. He'd only been in charge for about 2 years. And they wanted to hire like a backstage interviewer to be like a sort of, behind the scenes face the promotion, doing, post-fight interviews, pre-fight interviews, little bits to camera. We were traveling like to the Middle East a lot back then. So we take fighters out and take them walking around and, visit some cool places. And he asked me if I'd be interested in going to an event in Jordan the next week. And he's like, not to work. He's like, he goes, all you need to bring is your passport. We'll take care of everything for you. Come and see what it's like, see if you like it, and then we'll take it from there. And I hung the phone up, and I remembered that a week before I'd lost my passport. And I was like, oh, fuck. Like, I couldn't believe it.
This so far has been the quintessential MMA journey.
It's just one falling from one disaster to another.
Yeah. But this is how it goes.
So we have a thing in England where you can get a fast track passport in like 5 days. However, my passport had been issued in Amsterdam because I was living in Holland when I had my last passport. And if you have a non-UK issued passport, you can't do the fast track. So I had to ring him back and say, sorry, I can't do it. And he said, oh, well, I do lots of shows. I'm sure I'll speak to you again at some point. And I was like, that's it. He's never going to ring me again.
Right.
He's going
to
delete this number
man
straight
ever.
away. Yeah. And then 3 weeks later, he was like, look, do you want a job? And I was like, oh, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll take it. Didn't even ask what it was, how much I was getting paid. And yeah, I just started doing that really. Like I'd started doing commentary around the same time. Like I'd never really planned to get into that. I'd always really enjoyed like the commentary and wrestling, like a big fan of like Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon and all those guys. And I got the chance to do like some local shows in the UK. I never thought I'd be commentating for Cage Warriors, mainly because John Gooden was the play-by-play guy and he's fucking excellent. So I was like, I hope he gets sick one day, just for one, nothing serious.
Yeah, nothing serious. Just one day where he can't be there.
Just a bad cold, laryngitis, maybe something like that, and they'll give me a go. And obviously, John was in 2013, I want to say, called up to the UFC, and I was like, "This is my time. This is my time." And then Cage Warriors got Frank Trigg to come in and start doing commentary with Josh, who was the color guy. So Josh started doing play-by-play. Frank Trigg was doing color. And I was like, well, never mind. Maybe Frank Trigg will get sick one day. And then a few months later, it was like he couldn't make every show. So I got 4 days notice that I'd be commentating on live television for the first time ever. And I just got a Facebook message saying, you're commentating this weekend. Good luck. I was like, okay, cool. All right. Get on the plane. Fly to Jordan.
Really is the quintessential MMA story because that is how it works in a lot of instances. Hey, by the way, I need you to do this. You're getting no notice. It seems like there are 2 tracks. Either people know very early on that they want to get into this stuff and they pursue it fully. It's school, it's the whole 9, and it's the lifelong track. And then there's folks like you and I that are like, this is something I enjoy. I'll get started in it, see what I can do, grind a little bit. This sucks. I'll have another job. I'll just do it for fun. And then suddenly it becomes a career and it's just like, here, do this. It seems, clearly you're still doing it. They have been happy with your work. Everyone that watches the show and listens to Cage Warriors, certainly happy with your work. Has it been like, what was that first show like of the 4 days notice, jump on a plane, let's go? Were there nerves? Obviously there's nerves, but was there did it just fit? Did it just feel like, this is where this is what I wanted. I wanted to try this. Here I am.
Yeah, it was, a lot of stuff went wrong, obviously, because why wouldn't it? The show was in a place called Amman in Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
And I opened the show pronouncing it wrong. And I said, it's great to be back in Amman, which people remind me of very regularly. You can actually hear one of the referees laughing on the broadcast as well, which is fantastic. And I misspoke when calling the knockout in the main event, and I called the knockout for the wrong guy, but it was kind of wild and everyone was screaming and shouting. So I think I got away with that. But he told me that they wanted to use me again the next show. So I was like, it must have been okay. But it kind of, like I say, I've been commentating on like the regional circuit before, and like, especially back then, like a lot of people weren't really taking it seriously. The promoters were just getting their friends in to commentate or ex-fighters. and you get guys literally just sitting there drinking beer all night and having a chat and swearing and having a great time, but not really doing what you would call like professional commentary. And I always kind of took it quite seriously and tried to, I tried to commentate as if I was commentating in the UFC, and I was obviously trying to ape those guys to a certain extent as well. So I felt quite comfortable working with Josh. And Josh is a great color commentator. He's a high level. He's now a black belt. I think he was maybe brown or purple at the time, but high level grappler. And really, really good at breaking down positions and explaining them in really easy layman's terms. Obviously, I'd known Josh for a long time anyway, so we had a rapport, and we just seemed to click really well. I've worked with a lot of different guys now, and it takes a while to sort of get that rhythm and flow. But Josh, after a few shows, it got to the point where we didn't even have to look at each other, because sometimes you'll sort of look at the guy to give him a little nod,
give him a nod,
or
it's going to be your turn here, and
or
ready.
even just a little touch on the arm or whatever. And Josh and I, we just knew when one of us would stop talking and the other would start. As soon as something technical started happening, I'd just be quiet and let Josh go. And it's the same now with also commentate with Dan Strauss now, who again, incredibly high level grappler and superb at breaking stuff down. Obviously, we had Dan Hardy for the past couple of years as well. And it's very easy when you've got guys who are that good next to you in the booth. It's so easy to just let them do their thing. And then I guess it's like a play-by-play guy. I'm the guy, telling the story and then just stitching everything else together. So I definitely felt quite comfortable doing it from the off. I won't say that everything went perfect, obviously, because it never does. But for it not being something that I'd ever particularly planned to do, I just think I just kind of fell into a really easy groove straight away. And as I say, watching a lot of combat sports and watching a lot of wrestling, and obviously the commentary is such a big part of wrestling as well, of telling those stories. I'm not a professional fighter, I'm not a professional grappler, so I'm not going to try and explain any of that stuff. I'm going to leave that to the guys who are. I'm going to tell the story of the fight. And I guess I'd had so much input of that growing up, being such a big wrestling fan and watching boxing, watching kickboxing. I'd kind of had my lessons, I guess. I wasn't just going in blind.
That's what I was going to ask, was how did you sort of go from zero to now I'm calling the biggest show, one of the biggest shows in Europe, right? Because it is that thing where regional shows, not to disparage them by any stretch, but there's less pressure, there's less sort of requirement on you as the commentator. As you said, sometimes it's just bringing in my mate that wants to call a show, or the local fighter that's going to come in and do play-by-play and they have no idea how to do it anyways. What was it for you? Was it really just sort of, as you said, aping the UFC guys, taking what you knew from watching pro wrestling and being like, these are the things that I need to do? And then what has been the, I guess, development process for you in terms of improving, getting better, honing that craft?
I guess how I kind of approached it was what I would want to hear if I'm listening to MMA commentary, if I'm watching an MMA fight, what would I want from the play-by-play guy? And so often I see guys on big shows as well, and they're not sticking to those clearly defined roles, and you get found out. You get guys who they try and just if for example, I'm sat next to Dan Strauss, and I obviously know probably more than the average guy about jiu-jitsu and stuff. But if I start talking about that kind of stuff, I'm going to make a mistake. Right. And all the guys who are watching who do know more than me are going to point that mistake out on the internet. And that's never a good time.
Because that is what the internet is for.
Exactly.
Identifying the places where someone speaks out of turn.
Yeah. So, for me, it was just a case of really learning what needs to be said and what doesn't need to be said. And being able to, knowing when to bring a guy into the conversation, because I've been really lucky on Cage Warriors to commentate with some of the best color commentators in Europe. I've done a lot of commentary for regional shows in the UK and Europe over the past 10, 15 years. And, you turn up there and the promoter maybe doesn't want to pay for two commentators. And they're like, oh, here's this guy who's had 3 amateur fights. He's going to, he's the guy who's a bit gobby in the gym. He's going to commentate with you, but he's still a fighter, right? So he's got the knowledge.
Right.
And it's learning when to bring him in. So I'd kind of say to people, I will, when a fight finishes, we'll all go, yeah, but then I will call the finish of that fight and then I'll bring you in for your reaction and I'll get you to explain it. Or knowing, like, when there's, a grappling engagement going on, turning to the other guy and bringing them in and saying, what's he doing here? What does the other guy need to do here? What should he be doing here? If you were his coach, what are you telling him? And basically, like, drawing on the experience of those around you and adding that, into the flow of conversation. Like, I was never really a big note taker either. I used to, like, famously not make any notes, like, but I had the advantage of, I've been calling these guys fights for years, and a lot of the guys who end up on Cage Warriors, I've called their amateur fights, I've called their early pro fights. I've known them since they were kids. I've watched their careers, I've followed their careers. So it's all kind of up here. So I'm not having to, like, remember. I know which show they debuted on because I was there calling the fight, kind of thing. So I had all that information. Ian Dean, our matchmaker, does a stat sheet, of stuff like age and height and reach and what gym they're currently fighting out of, that kind of thing. So I just have that in front of me and I just kind of blag it. Things changed during the pandemic because we started doing these trilogy shows where we did 3 shows on back-to-back nights.
Right.
And that was a bit too much. So I was like, right, I'm going to make some notes.
Right.
now.
I'm going to have a couple cue cards here. To help me out. Yeah.
So I would just, like, and I handwrite my notes when I do that, because I find, and I would wait till, like, the morning of the fight or the night before and handwrite, because I find it just sticks in my head better if I write it down. And I was actually finding I wasn't really having to look down at them, because the thing is, like, when you're doing live TV as well, it's different from when you're doing, like, a regional show that's just going out on YouTube or whatever. When you're doing live TV, you've got a producer in one ear, a director in the other ear, you've got 1 or 2 other commentators, you've got 3 monitors in front of you and the fight. You don't need something else to look at. Like, you don't need to be looking down, like, oh, when did he make his date? You know what I mean? So, like, I'd be using that for stuff like, during the walkouts, like reading off the records when they've made their amateur debut, just dates and things like that, which obviously adds a little bit more to the broadcast when you've got 3 full days and, you need stuff to talk about. But just maybe having just a couple of little, maybe like a big moment from their previous fight, I'll note that down, and if I can relate that to what's happening, because at the same time as well, like, as a commentator, it's great having all the knowledge and knowing people's backgrounds and everything, but you're also not there to give people a history lesson. I think
at
the end of the
day,
day,
there to set up the present as opposed to recount the past.
It's important to have that information. You need to be able to drop some of those knowledge bombs and get people invested in the fight and the fighters, crucially. And also, you might have a 15-minute fight where nothing happens, and there's only so many times you can say, "Oh, he's pushing him on the fence. Oh, he's reversed the position. Oh, now he's reversed it back, and he's punched him in the body." You need stuff to talk about right?
You need the information about them to fill those gaps, for sure.
Yeah. So, like, that's something that I kind of, like, developed over the years, going from, like, not having anything to just having, like, some basic notes and things. And I think it helps, like, even just to write them out. And I write notes for the other guys now as well and just give them to them. And just having typed it out the day before, things were a bit fresher in my mind. I got COVID twice, and it's really smashed my memory. Like, I've got, like, serious brain fog. It's getting a lot better now, but I last had COVID last October, and obviously we had 3 events in November, and I was really struggling, and I really relied on notes for those cards. So it certainly helps in that regard. But hopefully that's not going to be an issue too much moving forward.
Hopefully not. I'm glad the brain fog is getting better. Do you keep the notes like Anik? I know we've seen Anik at times will break out the little boxes that he has. They're all alphabetized. It's a cue card for each guy. Do you keep them, or do they just get stored on the computer or binned?
So the paper notes, like, I've got most of my notebooks, but they're certainly not in any kind of, like, I'm more of an organized chaos kind of guy, in that I write my notes out in the fight order, and then I turn a page over in the first fight, and the next event starts there. So I've got all these notes, and they're good to look back on. Like, if say we've had a guy who's fighting on Cage Warriors and he's not fought for maybe a year or 6 months or something, to go back and find those notes, see what I wrote about then, and kind of add it to the matrix. I know Josh used to have an awesome Excel spreadsheet with every single fighter, and it would update all their records and everything. And I can't be doing with Microsoft Excel at all. I'm not a spreadsheet guy. I'm not a numbers guy. So for me, that's yeah,
Fair enough.
they all exist. They're all like in my emails and they're in my
Right.
Google Drive and
Can
things.
find them.
I'm sure like when I'm old and grey, I'll be looking back on them and having some fond memories. What I do tend to keep actually, and this might be a bit weird, I don't know, but like what we get like a fight card, with the broadcast order on when we sit down at the table that all the judges have and all the production staff have. And having a large white piece of paper on a table next to a cage where there's a cage fight happening often means you get some very interesting blood splatters across those bits of paper. So I've got a few really cool like blood splattered fight cards that
frame them, put them up somewhere.
Yeah, I should probably like vacuum pack them or something. Really, there's probably some like hazardous materials, but God bless SevereMMA and their rigorous blood testing procedures. That's all I say.
All right, so let's jump from MMA for a little bit. And you mentioned moving to Amsterdam, moving to Holland, growing up there. I would have to imagine, as you said, with everything, and I mean, I know just the cursory information that I think everybody knows about Holland and Amsterdam and the things that are legal, as you mentioned, the things that are not, and things like that. So what is it like? So first, let's start with what prompted, how did you move there? And then, I mean, as a teen growing up in a place like that, the facial expression says it all, but walk me through some of it.
So basically, my dad had started working in IT, and it was kind of the time when there was like a real like tech boom going on, and he got a couple of really good job offers, and he was working for Shell, the oil company, and he basically got a 6-month contract to work in Holland, and him and my mom talked about it, and he was like, right, I can. They basically like they put him in a hotel I think he lived in for 6 months, and then they flew him back home every other weekend I think, and we would go out in the school holidays and spend a week with him. And it was pretty tough on the family, like dad not being there, me being 13, so just about to start misbehaving and that kind of stuff, right. And my mom working, and like I had to take my brother to school and stuff. So, and yeah, I think it was a bit difficult. And obviously, like my mom and dad missed each other. Like they'd never been apart really for any length of time at all. And then at the end of the 6 months, they offered him another year, and the money was just too good to turn down. My mom's like, right, yeah, you can do it, but we're coming too. So we moved out, and they made the decision in about a month, I think. And then they told us about 3 weeks before we moved out that we'd be going, which sucked at the time because like I just got my first proper girlfriend, 13 years old, holding hands, that kind of thing. So for me, it was like the end of the world. So I was listening to the Verve in bed, crying the night before he left. I didn't want to go at all. And like we'd never lived outside Manchester before, so moving to a different country was wild. I think I'd only ever been on 2 overseas holidays at the time, and obviously been to Holland twice, I think, to see my dad when he was working there. But we went to British school. The Shell place out there is huge, and I think about 50% of the people at that school are children of Shell kids. And then you've got the United Nations over there as well, so you got all the ambassadors' kids. So it was a real cool mix of people, because there was people from like working class backgrounds like me, and then there was like an ambassador's kid who comes to school in a limousine, and we're like, do you want to ride home? Well, in your limo? Yeah, sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course I do.
Right. So yeah, that was pretty cool. So I guess, I mean, it was a real culture shock going from like a state school in a pretty rough part of Manchester to a kind of posh private school. I remember it's something that's probably driven my cynicism ever since. Just before I left, we had the armed forces come into my school in Manchester to do like a presentation, and it's like, join the cadets, the army cadets at 16, and then enlist at 18. And it was literally just like videos of like tanks and explosions, and they were just wanting to recruit, army grunts and Marines and whatever else. And then a few weeks after I started the private school in Holland, we were told, oh, we've got the armed forces coming in to do a presentation. I was like, oh, I've already seen this. And they sent the officers, and it was all about higher education and being an officer. And I was like, oh, you motherfuckers, like looking for cannon fodder at the state schools in Manchester, and you're coming to private schools looking for officers. So, yeah, I think that was the My dad's always told me to be very cynical, and that certainly helped things along.
So I very much identify with the had my first proper girlfriend and had to move. Did that myself. End of year 7, we moved. It was like, guys, like we've been here for 4 years. I'm settled in. I got this girl that likes me. She's really cute. This kid, like we're going into year 8. Like this is, I get to be the king of the school and you're pulling me and we're moving to a gigantic city where I know nobody. Come on, you're killing me. What was, you mentioned obviously culture shock of going from public school to posh private school. How quickly did it take root? How quickly did you settle in? How comfortable did you get being around that sort of very different collection of people?
I've always been good with people. I've always like had lots of friends, and I've always kind of like made friends with people a bit older than me. So I've always been like kind of like confident in social situations. And I think with a school like that as well, like Shell, for example, they tend to move people around. So like my dad was a contractor with Shell. So when he finished his contract there, he ended up working for a Dutch bank. But the permanent employees of Shell, they tend to move them around a lot, like every 4 years. And it's so the families don't get settled basically, and the kids are kind of used to it. So there's a big churn of students at schools like that. So everyone's super welcoming. And you find that like a lot of the kids there, they tend to make friends very quickly because they're, you know, you might have a friend for 2 years and then they're gone.
Right.
So everyone was like super welcoming. And my main concern was like, I'm not a posh kid. And like I was like, I don't know how I'm going to fit in with these people. And what, you know, when you hear someone's like, oh, this is the Nigerian ambassador's daughter, you're like, oh, like
I
what?
have
Like,
nothing
what?
in common with this
Am I
child.
using the right knife and fork here? Like what's going on?
Right.
But to be honest, like everyone was sound, and like, you know, there were only a few like super posh people. Like there was some incredibly rich people. Like I took a girl to prom in like when I was 16 and went to pick her up from her house, and she lived in like the Barbie mansion and had a butler. And I was just like, oh, man, this is a rented
Yeah.
tuxedo that I'm terrified of spilling beer on because I'm gonna have to pay the bill for this
Right.
out of my paper round money. Like
Right.
this we are not the same.
Yeah. Right.
But it was cool. And like I didn't particularly enjoy like the academic side of school. Like I loved history, English, and psychology, hated everything else. But I learned a lot being at that school. Like I learned that like, you know, you can be your own equalizer. Like no one's any better or worse than you. Like that there's no excuse to ever look down on someone because of their social standing or anything else. And like I'm confident now that I can go into a room with anyone from any background and have a good time, have a good conversation, not feel intimidated. And that more than anything else is what I took away from you know, being in, you know, what, you know, let's be honest, quite a privileged position to be at a school like that.
For sure.
And I can never thank my parents enough for you know, spending what was a I looked up how much it cost recently because I went back there to just to pay a visit, and I was like, man, like I know you love me, but I wouldn't have paid that money. Like
Right.
I
am not worth that investment.
Yeah. I was saying to my brother, like, I hope mom and dad aren't expecting us to spend this kind of money on their home when they're reaching their old age, because they're going to be left.
We don't have it. And
No.
I'm not spending that kind of bread. You mentioned the move taking place sort of at that point, and your dad initially going for the first 6 months. At that point, when you were, as you eloquently put it, and really did put it well, just starting to get into trouble, just starting to be a bit of a shit, like as we all are. I mean, not all of us. There are some that don't get into trouble, and God bless them, but most of us at some point hit a little bit of the mischievous side, hit a little bit of the pushing boundaries side. What was it like to go from tough Manchester to I'm over here where there's all kinds of other different vices that, oh, some of these are legal vices now. I could get into even more trouble.
It was it was interesting. I remember like when we first moved over there, I guess I must have been about maybe 14 by that point, and I was sat in the bar with my dad. And the thing was with Holland, the legal drinking age is 16. So my dad was like, right, when I sort of hit 14, he was like, right, you can have a beer. Like if we go out for dinner, you can have a beer. If you sat in the house, you can have a beer. So he would take, we had a bar like right downstairs under the apartment where we lived. And my parents used to go in there a lot, so he'd taken me in there one day and used to talk to all the barmaids and stuff. And the barmaid was like, "So, what are you going to do when he comes home and says he wants to smoke a joint in 2 years?" My dad was like, I haven't really thought about that. Like, and my parents were always like, they were always really cool about stuff. Like, they were like, "Look, here we are. It's going to happen. If we tell him he can't do it, he's just going to go and do it elsewhere." And my dad was just like, "If you've got any questions about drugs, just come and ask me, and I'll tell you the truth." Like, I know he'd had a lot of experience with various mind-altering substances in his heyday, and I guess he'd be a good person to talk to. I'd certainly rather learn that from him than someone who hadn't.
Right.
And he said he'd always be perfectly honest with me, and he always was. Fortunately for my parents, I hate smoking. I cannot stand smoking cigarettes, weed, anything else. Like, I bought a pack of cigarettes when I was 15, Marlboro Red, smoked all 20 of them in one go. Never been so ill in my life. Just I had the headache for about 3 days.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, no, done. Never going to smoke again. And weed just didn't agree with me. Like, my nickname when I was 15 was Casper, because every time I smoked a joint, I would just turn white as a sheet. And I was just like, I'm not having a good time. Like, I'd go completely white. I'd feel sick. Because you can't smoke weed, or you used to be able to, but while I was there, the law changed. You can't smoke weed in most pubs. So my friends would go to a coffee shop, have a smoke, and then go to the pub. So by the time I got to the pub, I was white, didn't want to drink, and just sat in the corner.
Right.
Or on one occasion, things went particularly badly, and I lay under a pool table for about 4 hours until it was time to go home. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to leave this. I'm just going to leave this alone. But yeah, like you say, like, there's a lot of other stuff you can do over there. So, for example, you can walk down a high street and buy magic mushrooms of all different varieties and strengths and potencies, and they were made illegal, a few years back. The fresh mushrooms, but you can still buy the truffles, which are essentially the same thing. And I found I really like magic mushrooms. That was a good time. That was a very good time. And again, like, it's something I would say probably less harmful than smoking, to be honest. Like, there's not a whole lot of trouble you can get into. I mean, you hear the horror stories about, there's a guy did acid and tried to jump off a building because he could fly. That's not real. Like, that maybe one guy jumped off a building on acid, but
that's the story to scare every child from doing it ever.
Yeah. Like, for me, like, doing mushrooms with friends, like, we'd all just sit in someone's house and take mushrooms in the morning and turn all the lights on, or if it was really sunny, we'd go and sit in the garden and just enjoy the colors and then start laughing and have a great old time. So yeah, never had a bad experience there. And the way drugs are in this country, I wish it was like it was in Holland, because in Holland, like, you very rarely see the kind of issues that exist with hard drugs. And I think a lot of that is because there are things over there that aren't taboo. Like, you can go down the high street and you can walk past the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and you can go and buy some weed if you want to. You can go and buy magic mushrooms. You can buy herbal ecstasy, that kind of stuff. And it's all licensed and taxed and regulated.
Right.
And you're not in a situation where it's like this cool thing to go and do drugs. Like,
right. Removing the prohibition of it takes away some of that. Ooh, I want to do it. Takes away some of the illicitness of it. It's the same here in Canada. It's the same in the United States, where when it's the thing you can't do, well, now I want to do it. But when it's the thing you can do, it's like, yeah, all right, fine. And you've done it and you try it and it's great. And sure, I'm sure there's lots of people that are like, yeah, I did it. I tried it. And now I want to do it all the time. But when it's not as illicit, it becomes, to me, I agree with you, it becomes less of an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, my parents were always quite cool with that kind of stuff. Like, the one thing they said was, like, don't be doing stuff in the house. Like, we prefer you to keep it out of the house. But I know they were having a cheeky smoke as well. Like, I'm not stupid, even as a kid. Like, yeah, I remember, like, well, I was probably only about 15 or so, and like, they had a load of friends around, and they, like, me and my brother were like coming in and out of the front room, and they were like, you guys go upstairs now. You guys go and play on the N64 upstairs. And we're like, it's 7 p.m. And my dad was like, just go upstairs. Just go upstairs. And then there was a lot of laughing and strange smells coming from the
That's
front
right.
room.
Mom's cooking something.
Yeah.
She's trying a different recipe using different herbs and spices
Yeah,
this
look at
time.
this new vase that she's got. It's great. Yeah. But I think it's important. I think, I mean, I ended up like getting into like the clubbing scene, and I was doing like quite a lot of ecstasy and stuff, and did cocaine at quite a young age. And I think the fact that, like you say, it was like, because drugs aren't taboo, it wasn't like it was never a big deal. It was just like, yeah, we're going to a nightclub, so we'll do some pills. It wasn't like this whole big scary thing, and like we'd all had like a good education on it as well. Like the education we got at school was a lot better than any of the drug education that they get in England. Same with stuff like sex education as well. Like in Holland, they start sex education at a really, really young age. Like, and it's not like teaching kids about sex, it's just getting kids comfortable with talking about it. And then that, obviously gets, more intense as kids become teenagers and stuff. And again, Holland's got a really, really low rate of teenage pregnancy and all the associated stuff with it. And I really wish, like, England, for some reason, as I say this as someone who does not smoke, who will never smoke, but I really wish they'd just legalize weed over here, because I think it would solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, they've done it over here, and there's still problems. There's always going to remain issues, but I do think that, and I know there will be people that are like, right, but when the government gets involved, yes, fine, have your stance, have your position, shout to whoever you want to shout to. Making things where you can put some protections in place, where you can put that education in place, where you can make accessibility for people that are going to do it anyways safer, always feels relatively smart to me. Seems like not a bad idea.
It's baby steps. Like,
yeah,
one of the things that I was like really surprised with in Holland was that like bars stayed open really late, like really, really late. Like there are some bars that stay open all night in Holland. And in England, when I left, there was last orders was like 10 p.m. or 10:30 p.m.
Right.
And then there was nightclubs. So essentially what would happen is at 10:30 or 10 o'clock, when they called last, so they called last orders, then you have, I think, 40 minutes to drink up.
Right.
So people go to the bar, get 4 pints, smash 4 pints, fall out the pub, get into fights, start being sick, crawl into nightclubs, start fights in there, and it was just horrible. Right. Whereas in Europe, like I'd sometimes go out on a Saturday night at 11 o'clock at night. I'd get a train into The Hague at 11 o'clock and come home at like 3. And you never saw people, obviously, as you say, there's always one, but right. Seeing the kind of like the drunkenness and debauchery that the English abroad are known for, like you just don't see it over there with the Dutch. And again, it's because they've got that more relaxed. You don't need to get 4 pints in at 10:30 because you can go where you want and do what you want. Now, it's a lot more relaxed now in England. And I think like the worry was in England, it was that they would switch to that kind of system, 24-hour licensing, and then all of a sudden everyone would be just drinking like that for 24 hours. But of course it doesn't happen. And like I say, like now in England, places stay open later. And certainly it's just because I'm a bit older now and I'm not going out to the same kind of bars anymore, but it certainly seems to be a lot better than it used to be.
Yeah. Let's slide back to MMA for a little bit. We'll come back to some of this other secondary stuff, other pieces, because there's one subject I definitely need to dive into with you. But talk to me about the current state of Cage Warriors. Talk to me about, names people need to watch for in 2023. Some of the people that you look at as having the opportunity this year to really have an impact both domestically and then potentially abroad with getting a call up, whether it's to Bellator or the UFC or ONE or wherever it may be. Who are the most prominent names to you for folks to pay attention to?
It's been a mad year, and I feel like I say that every year. Like this year, obviously, I joined Cage Warriors full time at the end of last year. So I'm working in the office now with like the marketing team, and I have like a talent development role as well. So one of the things I've literally just been doing with the marketing guys is the end of year awards, and I don't think I've had a more difficult task since starting there than putting these awards together. I think we settled on 5 nominees for each award at the end of it, and there was so many that were like, this should be in, but you can't take anything out. And I think that's, you know, it's the 20th
It's a good
anniversary.
problem to have.
It's a great problem. Yeah. You know, 20th anniversary of Cage Warriors this year. And it just seemed that the whole roster like really, really stepped up to the plate. Guys to look out for. I don't know how many more fights he's going to have in Cage Warriors, but Paul Hughes is an absolute stud. Had a very close fight with Jordan Vucenic a year or so ago. Contentious split decision loss. The rematch they had earlier this year, one of the craziest atmospheres I've ever been a part of. Like the fans that came from Ireland to support Hughes and Jordan Vucenic's fans as well just created a phenomenal atmosphere. And I don't think anyone on the Cage Warriors roster was beating Paul Hughes that night. I just think it was one of those, like the stars had aligned. He fought pretty much a perfect fight. I mean, the first round was fairly close, but after that, he didn't make a mistake, I don't think. I've watched it back a few times. Just phenomenal. Selfishly, I'd love him to be on that card in Dublin that we're doing in April because it would be insane. But unselfishly, I want him to be on the March UFC card in London because I think he deserves it. He's an incredible young man. He's overcome some incredible adversity early in his career with injuries that he was told would be career-ending, if not at least career-shortening. He's overcome them. And the mental strength for a man of his age to be able to do that, come back from it, is just outstanding. And technically, he's the real deal, as we've seen. Guys who you're probably going to see a couple more times in Cage Warriors, the Hardwick brothers. Those guys are studs, man. Like people say, like they're Middlesbrough's answer to the Diaz brothers, and they really are. They've got like incredible personalities outside the cage. They're so dry, they're so funny, and those guys can bang. I mean, they just love a fight. I don't think either of them's ever been in a fight that they didn't enjoy. Incredible grappling that you don't always get to see so much of because they're so good with the boxing. You know, Harry's nominated for Fight of the Year this year. George, the lightweight champ, is nominated for Fighter of the Year, and I think Knockout of the Year as well. And I'd be incredibly surprised if you don't see Harry fight for the featherweight title this year too. So definitely two more to keep an eye on. And I guess Tobias Harilla as well. I mean, he's such a unique character, and if you know the name, you know exactly why I'm bringing this guy up. Like the dude's insane. Like he comes to the cage in like a priest outfit with a scary clown face, or like, you know, he walks out to the purge siren. The guy is just a different level, man.
Yeah,
like,
when you're done watching this, just type in Tobias Harilla, Harilla, into your YouTube search engine, and even add intro. Just add walkout, and then thank us later.
He's wild, and you know, to his detriment, sometimes he fights with his heart on his sleeve. Like he gets into wild punch ups that, you know, the guy's got a great takedown and ground and pound game, but he loves a fist fight. Like I remember sitting in the front row of the weigh-ins. I'm typing up the weigh-ins article for the Cage Warriors Facebook site as the weigh-ins are happening, and he had his face off with Damon Wilson just before the New Year's Eve event. And after the face-offs, he turned around, and I've never seen such a smile on a guy's face before. This guy was like, "I'm gonna get to punch this guy in the face tomorrow night," and I love it. Like, and you can't, if you enjoy this sport, you can't not enjoy a guy like Tobias Harilla. And then like next generation, you know, a lot of people talk about Paddy Pimblett and Molly McCann, but there are so many good fighters coming out of that gym. Nathan Fletcher, Adam Cullen, Matt Camilleri, a fighter we've just signed. Luke Riley, like there's next gen is on fire at the moment. You know, there's so much buzz in that gym from the success that Paddy and Molly are having, and it's really bringing up that next wave of talent. And you're going to see those guys in Cage Warriors title fights next year, 100%.
And I know very recently we saw Christian Leroy Duncan was supposed to fight, didn't get the opportunity to defend his title.
Yeah, the most Jesse Taylor story of all time, right?
I mean, the most. I woke up to it, so obviously I'm here in Canada. I'm several hours behind you guys. I woke up and saw the news and was like, "This is just a Jesse Taylor. This is 100% a Jesse Taylor story." I said the exact same thing as you. It's just like this is what you come to expect with Jesse Taylor, but it worked out for Christian Leroy Duncan, who then was signed to the UFC and is set to make his debut. We don't know an opponent yet, but we'll be fighting on that March card. Knock on wood that everything remains that way. In London. Tell folks that maybe haven't seen him, maybe don't know sort of the full spectrum of what to expect. what to expect when they see him in there.
This is a guy who he's like the poster child for coming up the right way in the early stages of your career. His coach is Mark the Wizard Weir, UFC veteran and a long-time MMA and traditional martial artist from the UK. Very, very experienced, knowledgeable guy, been around the game a long time, knows it inside out. And he kept Christian an amateur for a long, long time. Like a lot of guys will have 5-6 amateur fights and they'll turn pro. Christian had nearly 25, I think, amateur fights. And most of those were at the IMAFs. So he's fighting guys at the highest level. And, you know, a lot of the teams, especially the teams from like the Middle East and the Eastern European teams, they're essentially guys who are getting paid to train full time. And they're elite level. They're as good as any 10-fight pro you're going to find anywhere. And Christian fought those guys for a long time, had a lot of success there, won the Cage Warriors Amateur Academy Grand Prix as well, and then turned pro and just started fighting better and better guys. And you're looking at the guy and his records 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, and that's not a 3, 4, 5-0 fighter.
Right.
That's a guy who's many, many miles into his journey. And I, you know, by the end of it, I was calling him the human highlight reel. And again, when you've listened to this, go to YouTube, type his name in, find every fight. Every fight there was something crazy, whether it's a spinning elbow or a flying knee or just something wild in every single fight. He's got a wheel kick finish, I think, in Cage Warriors as well. The dude's a beast. He's so complete. And what's terrifying is we've not seen what he can do on the ground really yet. And he's just as good there as he is on the feet. You talk to guys who've trained with him and they're like, oh no, you don't want to know about his ground game as well. It's just horrible. You don't want to be underneath that guy. You don't want him underneath you reaching up. He's got long limbs and a super athlete as well. I believe he played basketball a bit when he was younger. The dude's a stud. He's going to be a serious problem. And I think that middleweight division as well, traditionally not the deepest.
Was just going to say, coming into a division where there will be opportunities, there always are. Sean and I joke about it every time we do the state of the UFC, but it's the joke because there is that reality of it's pretty shallow, and the number of young emerging talents that have the overall ability to put some wins together and make a climb in that division. We saw how quickly, and this isn't to compare him to Izzy as anything like that, but we saw how quickly Israel was able to ascend. We saw even before that how quickly Rob Whittaker was able to ascend when he moved up from welterweight. It's because there is opportunity and room when you bring that skill and that talent and that willingness to get out there as frequently as those two did at the time to move forward. And I know that you guys all think very highly of Christian Leroy Duncan. I'm looking forward to seeing, first and foremost, who the matchup is, because that's going to be really interesting to me, but then to see him in that cage, because everything I've seen tells me this is a guy to pay attention to coming forward.
100%. And you know what the best thing is as well? He's such a nice guy. Like, he's one of those guys you just want every success for. Like, he's so cool. He's so polite. He was so easy to work with. Like, if anyone makes it big, I would love it to be him.
Okay, so we're going to pivot back. I need you to talk to me about the sneaker obsession. I need you to tell me. I need to understand. So I have a very dear friend of mine over here who is certainly up on sneakers and is very much I see the IG posts and the tweets of got him when he's buying off different sites. And every time I see it, I send one of like, how often will you wear those? You, at least I will give you credit. I follow you on all your socials. I see you out and about in fantastic kicks all the time. You are always wearing something fresh, something fly. But help me understand, because it's not a thing I've ever gotten into. I have maybe 3 pairs of shoes that I just rotate through, and that's it. It's one pair for nice walking around, like Converse, high top. Those are my nice going out sneakers. I have a pair of Bluntstones, and I have a pair of I've got to walk the dog in the messy field boots. That's all I'm running with. You have probably 30 times that. Talk to me about it. Tell me about it. Let me give me the pitch. Give me the elevator pitch for being a true sneakerhead as you are.
When I was a kid, like when we were growing up, like my parents didn't have a massive amount of money, and one of the things that my mom always made sure we had was a good pair of shoes. And she always like, I didn't want like a good pair of shoes. I wanted a good pair of trainers. And she was like, no, you're going to have a good pair of shoes to go to school in. And that was just always a thing. And she'd always say to me, like, when you walk into a room, the first thing that people will look at is your shoes. Like, you've got to have your shoes polished and this, that, and the other. So I guess that was always like been at the back of my mind. And like, the other thing that like my parents always kind of drilled into me when I was a kid was like, just like be yourself. Like, don't wear the same stuff as everyone else just because that's what everyone else wears. Wear what you want. Like, and wouldn't the world be a boring place if everybody had the same gear on? Like, everybody looked the same, everybody acted the same. So I've always had something that like, I don't do it to stand out, but like if I like something, I'm gonna wear it. I don't care if you think it looks ridiculous. Like, I had a leather trench coat when I was 16 because I watched The Crow and I thought it looked fucking cool, and I was like, that's what I want for my 16th birthday, a leather trench coat. The trainers thing, like, I think it was Converse probably that started it off. Like, when I was a kid and in my 20s, I wasn't like mega into shoes then, but I started getting some cool pairs of Converse. Like, they started doing some like DC Comics collaborations. So I had a load of Batman Converse and Joker Converse and stuff. And then it just kind of went a bit mad from there. And now it's like, it's getting to be a problem. Like, I a few years back, I used to have quite a bad drug problem. And like, you realize when you've got a drug problem when you start hiding it from people, like, and you start doing it in secret. And it's starting to happen with trainers now. I'm like getting a pair of trainers delivered.
I mean, it's certainly a better bad problem to have. Let's be clear here, ladies and gentlemen. It is a much better bad problem to have to be doing in secret. Is I'm bringing more trainers into the house.
Yeah, but like, so my girlfriend will be at work, and obviously I'm working from home, so I'll have a pair delivered during the day, and then I can hide them before she gets in, and then like, I just have to remember like not to bust them out like while she's there, because this is the thing as well. Like a lot of them are quite distinctive, so she'll know if she's not seen them before.
Right.
The other handy thing is I bought her a pair of trainers for Christmas this year, and I didn't have to hide them. I just put them in a big pile of trainer boxes, and she didn't notice they were there. She'd been looking at them for a month, and she didn't realize that that they were there. But yeah, I don't know. I just like. I went through like the pandemic era. I bought a new pair for every Cage Warriors event, and that's what generally like when I wear them. I have like 3 pairs that I walk around in,
okay,
and then the rest of them like I just wear for shows. So they're all like in really good condition still. And yeah, I just like them. Like, it's my only vice these days. Like I say, like, not taking drugs anymore. I've got a bit of spare money. I might as well spend it on something useful rather than something that's going to do me a mischief. So
we will get to that vice here shortly, but we'll stick to this one for now. How many pairs are we talking? Ballpark.
In our apartment here at the moment, I think there's about 34 at the moment, and I've got a load like in storage at my parents' house, which I've not worn for a long time.
Okay.
But I'm at the point now. So this year I'm banned from buying trainers. I say banned, it's by mutual consent. I offered a 12-month embargo on buying trainers, and it was agreed. Otherwise, I was told that we have to move to a bigger apartment, and I'm going to pay for it. So it's the cheaper option for me.
Okay.
So I had 2 pairs arrive yesterday, which I technically bought before Christmas, and that's it.
Delivered.
Yeah, there was a whole
delivery
thing.
Date is right.
Yeah. So yeah. Probably maybe 34 pairs in the house at the moment.
Now, would you consider selling any of your, because this is the other thing I bring up with my friend Andy here is like, you're not wearing 2/3 of these. They're just taking up the limited closet space you have in your already small apartment that you pay a ridiculous amount of money for. Would you consider moving on from some of them, giving them a better home, or a home where they will be used? Or are these, they're sticking with us, and eventually we will need to get a bigger flat because I will need a room to put them all in, or I will need to get a storage unit to just have stacks on stacks of boxes.
The thing is, like, I don't buy trainers on a whim. Like, I do genuinely like go for ones that I really, really like. Like, so I'm not going to get rid of any of them. I've got a duplicate pair of one of the ones that arrived yesterday coming because there was this whole mess up with the order. So I am going to sell that. I'm not going to have 2 pairs of the same trainers. If I'm only going to wear it once a year, like, they're not getting dirty or anything and getting messed up. So Like they'll have a long shelf life, but no, like I'm only buying ones that I want, ones that I will wear, ones that I really, really like. Like some of them is like the boxes as well. Like I've got a pair here next to me, and the box is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know if you'll be able to see it actually, but it's from it's a 3-way collaboration between like a Dutch street artist and a clothing company and Converse. And there's this beautiful it's almost like poetry, I guess, like on the box, about how walking through a city is like having a conversation between your feet and the road, and the graffiti are like the footnotes in the conversation, and the noises of the arguments that happen. It's just wonderful. I sit and read it like a couple of times a week. Like beautiful bit of writing, and like stuff like that. I'm never going to sell that. That's a great. It's almost like a bit of art, really.
For sure. And listen, I'm not here advocating for get rid of them. I don't push my guy Andy to get rid of anything. We all have the things that we collect that we want to look at, that we want to hold on to, things like that. So by all means, maintain the collection. Are there 2 or 3 favorites? Are there certain styles that you favor over others? Are there colorways that you like above others? Like if there's a top 3 in that collection, who are they? And I say who, not what, because I know they are talked about as if they are actual living, breathing things.
I love like a big chunky pair of high tops, like almost oversized. And I've got a pair of Converse, but like not like the Chucks, like the big chunky boot style things. And it's a collaboration with a Japanese designer called The Soloist. And it's just a big, oversized, exaggerated. They've got, instead of laces, they've got like a leather strap up the front with a zipper that's laced into the sides of it. And they're just huge. Like they just look like almost like big video game character boots. So yeah, I love those. I've got like a 1984 pair of Adidas Forum high tops that are absolutely sick. Never actually owned a pair of Nikes until this year. I got my first pair of Nikes this year. I got a pair of Dunks that are made out of offcuts from material at the factory. So they're all like stitched together out of like random little bits and colors and stuff. So I thought they were quite cool. But over
here, that's what I see the most of. Like that's my timeline. These sneakerheads in my timeline. That's what I see the most of is Air Force Ones and Dunks and a lot of Nike stuff.
The 2 that I got yesterday were Air Force Ones, and I've never had a pair of Air Force Ones before. Like, and I think that's again me sort of trying to not go with the flow a little bit and just pick the weirder stuff. Like, I have a pair of Reeboks, which are the shoes from Alien that the crew wore.
Okay,
like stuff like that. Like, I'll go for stuff like that rather than like, oh look, it's a new pair of like Jordans. I don't own a pair of Jordans yet, so. Maybe I will. Maybe in 2024 when the embargo is over, and I've cleared out some space, maybe I'll get a pair of Jordans.
Have to use this year to figure out what the trade-off is going to be to lift the embargo.
I have got one actually that I should have mentioned. I really should have mentioned first. So for the Cage Warriors 20th anniversary, I had a pair. Well, I had 3 pairs of Adidas Gazelles custom made. So I had a pair for me, a pair for Graham Boylan, and a pair for Ian Dean. With our names down the side, the Cage Warriors logo, and the yellow and black colorway that Cage Warriors uses. And the guy went on the website, got the exact yellow off the website, and then painted all the leather on the shoes in yellow. They're absolutely sick. They are going nowhere. They're getting framed.
I was gonna say they're going in a proper like display case box. Love it. You mentioned in there no longer doing drugs, moved on to a different vice. It was one of the things, and I think you posted about it last year at some point, and you and I had a little back and forth about it, just because to me it's a very impressive thing whenever someone is willing to be as transparent as you were with it and as you are with it. So without getting into all of the gory details and us going into, full on second hour of this program and therapy session and things like that, just walk me through a little bit of that period for you. I had one myself. It lasted about 4 years. And then I was like, I got to fucking stop all of this stuff because I know myself. I know my personality. I know where this leads, and I don't want to end up there. What was it for you? What was that period like? And why is it so important to you to be open and transparent about it as you have been?
I think so. Basically, what happened? I don't think there's any real like way to sort of make excuses for it or anything. At the time, I was working a really stressful job, 9 to 5 during the week, and then pretty much half to 2/3 of the weekends I was away commentating, and I was just never stopping. And every time I got a break, I was just partying hard, like way too hard. And the thing was, I was like fully functional as well. So I could get on it all night and then go to work in the office next day in a suit and tie, and nobody knew any different. It wasn't affecting my work. It wasn't affecting my social life at all. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Had like some family stuff going on at the time. And I was just using it as a sort of a form of escapism. But I would not have told you that I had a problem until it got to the point that it got bad, and I ended up having a small heart attack. And it probably took 2 months after that still for me to like fully realize like this, you're gonna die. Like, and I had doctors at that point say to me like, this cannot happen again. Like, you're lucky you're alive at the moment. And I just remember being in this hospital bed, and I'd not told my girlfriend at the time where I was. Like, she thought I was away working an MMA event, which I was, but she thought I was still, like traveling back that day, because like she basically said, if this happens again, like I'm gone, kind of thing. So I hadn't told her, and I was like, you can't just keep doing this, man. Like, you can't keep lying to people, and one day your mom's going to get that phone call. And I just could not put my parents through that. And I think by that point I was past the point of caring about myself. Like, I was like, I don't really care if I die or not, but I did not want my parents getting that phone call, or any of my friends and family, my loved ones. So yeah, that was kind of the wake up call, really. I tried to go to like a rehab thing. It didn't really work for me because they were just used to helping people in such different circumstances than me. Like, I had a job, I was financially okay, I had a house, like, and it was just a me thing, it wasn't like what they were offering for help just wasn't working. So I did it on my own, and I've never touched it since. Touch wood. 6 years now, nearly. This April 20th this year will be 6 years. So really fucking impressed with that.
As you should be.
But what happened a couple of years ago was that so I still have issues with my heart now. Like, my heart starts racing, and sometimes goes very, very slow, which obviously makes you like quite ill and floppy and stuff. And when it's racing, it sets your anxiety off. And I started getting really bad anxiety attacks. I never had an anxiety attack or a panic attack before. Always been like super confident, and even like doing commentary and stuff, like, I get nerves, but I used to like that bit of it. That was my favorite bit, like when the countdown was going on and you're ready to go live. I used to love it. Big grin on my face. And it got to the point where, especially during the trilogy shows where there was no audience, I was looking for doors to run out of when that countdown was on and the room's silent. Everyone's looking at you and pointing the camera at you. I was just crumbling inside. And I've asked everyone whose opinion I respect, like, could you tell? And everyone said, no, you couldn't really tell. So I don't really think it came across, but it just got to a point where it was so bad. I remember getting to the hotel the day before the event and wanting to leave. That it was like I was already that bad with it. And I think that was the week where I just went, right, you know what? I'm just going to tell everyone what's happening and why it's happening. And honestly, like, people say like it feels like a weight lifted off your shoulders. I physically felt it, like walking around the Fighters Hotel at the next event, just knowing that everyone knew, and there was no secret anymore. I felt like I could breathe again, and it didn't get better instantly. Obviously, one of the things that a doctor would normally give you is like diazepam, which Valium, to stop anxiety attacks. They don't give that stuff to people who've had drug problems. So it took a long time for my doctor to be willing to give me a medication like that, which super helped. I'm starting to sort of stop taking that now. I'm finding it a lot easier. But one thing that was really incredible was that obviously I got a lot of messages of people like well wishers, and some people knew my situation, close friends and stuff. But I started getting messages of strangers saying like, I read your Twitter thread about that and I'm in the same boat, or I feel like I'm getting to the same boat. And it's just so nice to know that I'm not the only person doing it. And like, the number of people I've spoke to, and just, you know, I'm not like some expert. I don't have all the answers. But if I can like talk to someone and help them realize that there's always a way out, as long as you're honest with yourself, and then ultimately honest with the people around you, I think that's a good thing. So as much as it helped me getting that weight off my shoulders, I think it's helped a couple of other people as well, and that's super important.
So first and foremost, as I said in there, you should be very proud about coming up on 6 years. It is a major accomplishment, and I don't say this as a one that you're here, or two as an advocate for any program or anything like that. Anybody that understands, it really is every single day, one day, just on to the next. And to get to 6 years is a really impressive feat. So congratulations on that, and be proud. Secondly, as Brian Campbell and I talked about on here about his depression issues and mental health issues, as you're talking about now, I 100%, anybody that follows me on Twitter, Instagram knows I am fairly open about my own struggles with anxiety and depression and those things. I cannot advocate enough for just talking to people. As you have said, none of us are going through any of these things alone. We are not unique in our challenges, in our struggles, in our vices, in our issues. Just speak to somebody, whether that is friends, family, strangers on the internet, therapists, doctors, mental health professionals, whoever it is. Whatever you are struggling with, whatever you are going through, there is someone that can help you, that can listen, that will talk to you. Find them out. We need you in this world. We need Brad in this world. We need BC in this world. I'm glad you have found those people, and I'm glad that you are doing the pay it forward sort of thing and being there. And I think that certainly helps, right? When you get people that say, holy shit, like, I didn't know you were going through that. I'm doing it too. It sort of brings some of that, takes away some of that feeling of alone, because that's a lot of it. I find for myself that a lot of my struggles, a lot of my issues with different things that led to some of my challenges and my issues with drugs and different things just comes from a point of feeling like you're the only person. And it comes from that point of shame where, oh my God, if I tell people this, what are they going to say? There's going to be 6 or 8 people that you know very well that are like, yeah, me too, man. Don't listen, me as well. Let's go sit and have a beer and talk about it, and we'll figure it out, because none of us are alone.
I think, you know, on the flip side as well, like you talk about like the fear of admitting something like that, you know, there will be a couple of people who are judgmental about it. Yep. And aren't there for you. But you know what, you don't need those kind of people around you, you know, and whether that's short term or long term or whatever. But you know, from my personal experience, overwhelmingly it was positive. And I had a couple of friends who unfortunately had to cut out of my life because I asked them, you know, what I thought was a very reasonable request to not be doing stuff around me, and they just wouldn't stop. And I was like, look, man, like, I nearly died. Like, don't be tempting me with this stuff, because like at the time I was still very much like, I didn't want to have a beer, because I thought if I have a beer and I have another couple of beers, I'm going to start getting on it, because that's how it always was for me. Right. Down the pub for a few drinks, and then on the phone to try and get, you know, to try and find someone to get some coke to me. And like I was terrified for a while, and I had to say, I asked a lot of friends if they would stop doing it. The vast majority did. A couple didn't, and you know what? It was just like, better off without you, my friends. Better off without you. Like, I wish you all the best, but you know, we're going on separate journeys now. And as I say, overwhelmingly among friends, among family, and as I say, like, people I now speak to quite regularly who I'd never spoken to before. People who maybe just followed me on Twitter, or like they'd seen someone like my tweet, so it brought it into their feed, and randomly messaged me, who I now talk to like quite regularly. And I've met people at Cage Warriors events who have been going through the same thing, and talking to those guys. Like, you're never alone. Like you say, there's always someone. And whether it's therapy, whether it's a personal thing, whether it's just talking to your mate or your mum or your sister or your brother or whoever, that conversation is the first thing and the best thing and the easiest thing you can do once you've done it.
You mentioned initially having an aversion or a fear of getting on the beers and having the pints. That fear is gone.
That
You
fear is
love
gone.
you love
Yeah.
cans.
I do.
Part of
I
your
really
feed
do.
is just, and it seems like, and you can, this is the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. Is it just because of the styling of the can? Is it just like you seem to have a very diverse taste, a very open, expansive mind when it comes to trying all of these various different cans? Are you drawn in by the flavor combinations? Are we drawn in by design of can? Because it's a whole lot of unique, cool shit when it comes to you and cans.
Yeah, like I obviously growing up in Holland, the lager's fantastic. You know, Dutch Heineken is absolutely delicious. There's great lagers over there, and I was always been a lager drinker. And obviously, like with craft beer coming out, like I guess maybe like 10 years ago, it started to become a real thing. I didn't really bother with it at first. I was like, I'm happy. I like my lager.
Right.
And then I just started trying things like Brewdog is obviously a big gateway for everyone into craft beers. I don't know if you have that over in Canada, but here it's like it's now regarded as like the McDonald's of craft beer kind of thing.
Okay.
So you'll get it in like your mainstream pubs and stuff. But that's what got a lot of people started. Whether the hipsters are willing to admit it or not, I certainly am willing to admit that Brewdog got me started. But yeah, the cans certainly like. I love going into a big can shop or a bar that's got like a big fridges full and just browsing. I think maybe it's like kind of the same as the trainers. Like I'll go for something that's a bit wild and a bit wacky, and it's got me to try things that I wouldn't have tried before. Like I've never really drank dark beers like stouts and things before, but tried some like chocolate stouts and pastry sours, all that kind of stuff, and a lot of it is because like I'm like, oh, that can looks kind of cool. Like I found one in Holland a few years ago, which had like a cartoon pug on it, and it's something that
I've seen it in your timeline.
I wouldn't have picked that up.
It stands out in
normally,
your timeline.
Oh my god, absolutely delicious! It was like drinking a fruit smoothie. Like if you put a spoon in that, it would have stood up. It was so thick. It took me about 2 hours to drink it, but oh man, it was worth it. But yeah, like and the good thing is as well, like. Because a lot of these are quite expensive, like I drink less of them than I would be if I was just drinking like Budweiser or something. That's so it kind of it keeps the volume down.
So what has been the best find and what has been the worst? Like, oh my God, I can't believe I've tried this. I can't finish it. It's that unappetizing, unappealing.
Well, I've never met a beer I couldn't finish. But I went to I think it was Copenhagen a few years ago with Cage Warriors, and my friend Ross, who used to work with us at Cage Warriors, he really liked sours, and he'd like to the point that he'd found this bar that had this sour in that he'd heard about, and he bought a pint of it. Now, obviously, with a lot of these craft beers, you drink like a half or a third or a 2/3, and he'd just gone and got this pint of this sour, and like beer's expensive over there anyway, and I think this would cost him the equivalent of about 22 quid or something for this pint. And I've never it was like having 100 lemons squeezed into your mouth and your eyes and every other bodily orifice at once. It was disgusting. But he was like, I've paid so much money for this.
I paid so much for it. I have to soldier through.
I tried to help him. I had about 2 mouthfuls, and it was almost like vinegar. It was absolutely foul. I don't know what was supposed to be in it, but disgusting. As for a best, there's a Scandinavian brewery called Omnipollo, and they're like, first of all, the designs in their cans are absolutely gorgeous. But they do like sort of very fruity beers, but they mix them with like almonds and lactose, and like they're super heavy. They're quite strong. It can take like an hour or more to drink it, but because there's so much going on, but like it's about 12 quid a can, so you want to make it last anyway, and it will last you like an hour and a half. But they are absolutely gorgeous. Unfortunately, because of Brexit, they don't deliver to England anymore. So I have to, like, if I see one out and about in the wild, I have to grab it. But yeah, they're not the easiest to get hold of. But I would, anybody, if you enjoy a beer of any kind, try an Omnipollo once before you die. It's a game changer.
Okay, I will certainly take that into consideration and keep an eye out. We have talked about some.
If you ever come to England, I will have one ready and waiting for you, sir.
Lovely. I will certainly take you up on that because yeah, for sure. We've talked about a few obsessions. We've talked about a few vices. We'll get you out of here on some quicker, potentially lighter notes. You mentioned a sibling, a brother. Any other siblings? Just one brother?
So I have a brother. So my parents split up when I was very, very young. So I was raised by my stepdad. Hate the term stepdad. He's my dad. So technically a half brother, but yeah, he's my little brother.
How many years difference?
4.5. So I'm 4.5 years older.
Okay.
And he's really into MMA as well, which is pretty cool. I showed him Tough 3, Shamrock versus Ortiz, and he was away then. He loved it.
I was going to say, I'm a younger brother, so the obvious question: how many fights? What's the worst injury?
We never really fought that much, to be honest.
Jesus.
Obviously, like a few little ones. The problem was, like, I'm like 6'1", and he's a lot shorter than me.
Okay.
However, when he sort of hit like 14, he started playing rugby, and is like quickly got to like sort of the near 200-pound.
Oh, so it was you that learned. I'm
yeah.
not gonna mess with him. Okay, fair enough. Even better. There we go.
He used to play with the like the 18-year-olds when he was like 15, because he was just smashing all the kids his own size. Like he can take a hit. That
so
boy.
You just wisely stayed away and were like, nah, it's fine. I don't need to do the big brother thing and try these holds on you. Unlike my older brother, who was like, hey, this UFC stuff's cool.
Yeah,
let's go and try it.
Yeah, but no, it's great. Like he actually worked an event with me a few years ago. He came and judged an event in the UK, and we went to there's not many people know about it, but there was like there was a Dutch show called Too Hot to Handle around the turn of the century for maybe about 6 years in Holland, and they did a show that was sort of unofficially partnered with Pride. So they brought like the Pride ring over and had all the Pride entrances and a load of Pride fighters. So I took him to that. I think that was like 2006 maybe. So we got to go to that together, and he's been to Cage Warriors and stuff, and he came to the Cage Warriors Academy with me last month. So like, it's cool having like a shared hobby like that.
Nice. Are there any other hobbies? I ask this of every guest. Are there secret things about Brad Wharton that no one knows right now that you are skilled at, that you are good at, or that you just enjoy doing? Or is it cans, trainers, and fights?
I'm a big video games nerd. I'm a big comic book nerd. Just a general nerd, really. I love sumo wrestling still. There's a tournament on at the moment, which I'm going to have to catch up with when we finish up here. But I've always been a big video game guy. Like I was of the NES generation, so Super Mario 3. I remember getting that and just being completely blown away, and just love video games ever since. I play them very differently now. Like I still like the old games, but like games back then were so difficult. Obviously, they were designed to last as long as possible, because like if you like speed run Mario now, you can get it done in an hour, but that game's got to last you like 3 months. So they made them purposefully hard. Whereas now, like, I don't have the time to play a level over and over and over and over again to get good. I want to relax. So for me, just being able to put like Red Dead Redemption 2 on and just pretend I'm a cowboy for 3 hours.
Roam around.
Yeah. And I still play Worms to this day. Like if anyone wants to play me at Worms, send whoever you want. Just don't send anyone you want back. That's all I'm saying.
There we go. Well, listen, this has been amazing. I greatly appreciate the time. I will let you get to the sumo tournament that you could catch up on. For Brad, I am Spencer. This has been a conversation with. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next week.